Kamen tightened his grip on Nebet's wrist. His jaw clenched as he dragged her across the burning sands. "Keep moving," he growled, his voice as cold as the steel of his sword. Nebet stumbled, her knees scraping against the rough ground, but she refused to cry out. She was shackled, wrists raw and bleeding, her once beautiful robes now torn and stained with dust. The Theban guards flanked them, spears glinting in the blistering sun, eyes fixed forward, ignoring the woman they were leading to death. "You don't have to do this," Nebet said, her voice breaking. "I am innocent." Kamen didn't respond. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard, but his mind was a storm. He had seen many prisoners in his years as the Pharaoh's most trusted commander, but none had looked at him the way she did. None had eyes that pierced through the mask he wore, eyes that burned with a fire that refused to die. "Please," Nebet whispered, stumbling again. "I was framed. They said I poisoned the queen, but I swear—" "Enough," Kamen's voice echoed through the canyon. The guards exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Kamen's hand trembled where it gripped her arm, the heat of her skin seeping through his fingers. "You tried to kill the queen," he said, his voice low, each word forced through gritted teeth. "And now, you pay the price." Nebet's dark eyes met his, defiant despite the tears glistening in them. "What if the real poison isn't in me?" she said. "What if it's in the palace?" Kamen's jaw clenched, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with something unsaid, something dangerous. He yanked her forward, forcing himself to look away, forcing himself to forget the fire in her eyes, the softness of her skin against his. She was a condemned woman, and he was her executioner. Nothing more, but as they continued toward the Valley of Scorpions, with each step sinking into the blistering sand, Kamen couldn't shake the feeling that the real poison was coursing through his veins, a poison that sounded a lot like doubt. Kamen marched ahead, eyes fixed on the horizon, the valley stretching out like a gaping maw waiting to devour them. The guards fell back, their muttered curses and cruel laughter fading behind as the wind howled through the jagged rocks. Nebet stumbled, the chains around her wrists biting into her skin as she struggled to keep pace with Kamen's relentless stride. "Why do you care so much?" Kamen snapped, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "You're going to die anyway." Nebet's gaze bored into the back of his neck. "And you're going to live with my death on your conscience." Kamen's jaw clenched. His fists tightened at his sides, but he didn't look back. "I have no conscience," he said, the words as hollow as his chest felt. "I'm a soldier." "You're a man," Nebet said, her voice cracking. "A man who knows the truth but is too afraid to face it." Kamen stopped abruptly, the sand swirling around his boots. He turned to her, eyes dark and burning. "You don't know me," he said, voice low, dangerously calm. "You don't know what I've done." "I know you haven't killed me yet," Nebet said, lifting her chin. "And I know that's a problem for you." Kamen's gaze dropped to her wrists, to the raw, bleeding skin where the shackles had rubbed her flesh raw. He swallowed, the sound harsh against the silence. "I'm not your savior," he said, his jaw tightening. "I'm your escort." "Escort to where?" Nebet asked, voice trembling. "My grave." "Your punishment," Kamen said, forcing the words out, each one like a blade slicing through his resolve. "For the crime of treason." "What crime?" Nebet shot back, eyes flashing. "The crime of being a woman who refused to bow. The crime of refusing to be silenced." Kamen stepped closer, his face inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin. "The crime of being accused of poisoning the queen." Nebet's jaw trembled, her dark eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "If I wanted to kill the queen," she said, her voice breaking, "why would I warn her first?" Kamen's heart pounded, his pulse roaring in his ears. He wanted to look away. He wanted to keep walking. He wanted to forget the way her eyes pierced through him, as though she could see the man he used to be, the man he was trying to forget. But instead, he stood there frozen, caught between duty and the sound of his own heartbeat, which was starting to sound a lot like her name. Kamen dragged Nebet up the incline, the sun glaring down like a furious god. Each step felt heavier, the sand swallowing their feet as if trying to pull them under. Nebet's breaths came in ragged gasps, her skin slick with sweat and dust. The guards trailed behind, their voices fading into whispers as Kamen and Nebet moved farther ahead, closer to the Valley of Scorpions. "You're a fool," Kamen muttered, his grip on her arm tightening. "If you think your words can save you." "Maybe they can't," Nebet said, her voice shaking but defiant. "But the truth can." Kamen clenched his jaw, his pulse thundering beneath his skin. The truth. The word echoed in his mind like a curse. How long had it been since he'd heard the truth? Since he'd spoken it? Since he'd believed it? "The queen wasn't poisoned," Nebet said, her gaze fixed straight ahead. "She was cursed." "Cursed!" Kamen's voice was low, a dangerous growl. "What are you saying?" "There was a priest," Nebet said, eyes darting around as if expecting someone to jump from the shadows. "He came to me weeks ago, warning me of a plot. He said the queen would fall ill, that her body would weaken, that she would wither from the inside out." "You expect me to believe that?" Kamen barked, his grip tightening until Nebet winced. "A priest warned you, and you did nothing?" "I tried," Nebet cried, stumbling as he jerked her forward. "I went to the queen. I told her everything. But she laughed in my face. She said I was delusional, that I was jealous of her power." Kamen's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. "Then why are you the one being escorted to death?" "Because someone wants me gone," Nebet said, her voice a broken whisper. "Someone powerful? Someone who fears what I know?" Kamen's heart pounded, each beat a thunderous roar in his chest. He forced himself to keep moving, his gaze fixed forward, his jaw locked tight. "You're lying," he said, but the words felt empty, hollow. "Am I?" Nebet's eyes locked onto his, dark and unflinching. "If you really believe that, then why are you shaking?" Kamen ripped his arm away from her, breathing hard, his hands trembling. His eyes fell to his sword, the weapon he'd used to silence so many voices. But Nebet's voice lingered, crawling under his skin, a poison he couldn't shake. "Tell me something, Commander," Nebet said, stepping closer, her shackles clinking like a haunting melody. "When you look at me, do you see a killer? Or do you see someone who was betrayed just like you?" Kamen's heart lurched, the world spinning around him. Betrayed. The word echoed through the valley, as the wind howled like a dying scream. Kamen shoved Nebet forward, the chains around her ankles clinking like ghostly whispers. They were deeper in the valley now, where the rocks rose like jagged teeth and the air stank of rot and decay. The guards hung back, their laughter echoing through the canyons, leaving Kamen and Nebet alone, trapped in a silence as heavy as the heat pressing down on them. "You're not like them," Nebet said, her voice raw and hoarse. Kamen's jaw clenched. "Shut up! You still have a soul," she said, stumbling over a rock, nearly falling to her knees. "You still have a heart that bleeds?" Kamen yanked her back to her feet, his fingers digging into her arm. "I said, shut up!" Nebet's eyes flared, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "You can't silence me forever." "Watch me," Kamen said, but his voice shook. Sweat trickled down his temples, the sun glaring down like a merciless eye. He glanced around, the landscape barren and lifeless. This was the place they left the condemned, the place where no one heard your screams, where the sand swallowed your bones and the wind carried away your last breath. "You still don't get it, do you?" Nebet said, her voice quieter now, but no less fierce. "They don't want me dead because I tried to kill the queen. They want me dead because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." "And what did you see?" Kamen asked, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "You already know," Nebet whispered, her dark eyes burning into him. "You just don't want to admit it?" Kamen's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. Images flashed through his mind, whispered conversations behind silk curtains, the queen's sudden illness, the way her eyes had gone glassy and dull, like a doll's. "You don't know anything," he said, voice low, dangerous. "You're just a liar." "Am I?" Nebet stepped closer, her breath hot against his skin. "Then why did the queen tell me to run? Why did she tell me to hide? Why did she say her own brother was coming for her? Kamen's blood ran cold, his heart pounding like a war drum. "Her brother is dead," he said, but the words felt like sand in his mouth. "Is he?" Nebet's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Or is that just what they want you to believe?" Kamen swallowed hard, his throat tightening. The ground beneath his feet felt like it was crumbling, like the world itself was shifting around him. "You're lying," he said, but his voice was a whisper now, fragile and breaking. "You're lying." "Then why are you shaking?" Nebet asked, her eyes never leaving his. "Why are you shaking, Kamen?" Kamen stormed forward, his breaths coming in sharp, ragged bursts. The air was thicker now, suffocating as if the Valley of Scorpions itself was closing in around them. Nebet struggled to keep up, her legs weak, her wrists raw and bleeding. "Tell me what you saw," Kamen demanded, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her to face him. "If you're going to die, then at least tell me why." Nebet's eyes blazed, her jaw set with a defiance that refused to break. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me," Kamen growled, his grip tightening until she winced. "They called me to the palace the night the queen fell ill," Nebet said, voice trembling. "They said she was coughing up blood, that her skin was turning black. But when I arrived, she was already gone." "Gone?" Kamen's brows knitted together. "Dead?" Nebet shook her head, her gaze distant. "No. Taken. By men in black robes with the seal of the high priest." Kamen's heart hammered against his ribs. "You're lying. The high priest is loyal to the Pharaoh. He would never—" "He's loyal to power," Nebet said, voice dropping to a whisper. "And if the Pharaoh's brother is still alive, then the high priest is serving a new master." The words struck Kamen like a fist to the gut. The Pharaoh's brother. Dead for years, drowned in the Nile after a failed coup. But what if he wasn't dead? What if he was biding his time, gathering power in the shadows, using the high priest as a puppet? "You expect me to believe you saw all this?" Kamen snapped, though his voice trembled. "You expect me to believe the queen is still alive?" "I saw her," Nebet said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They dragged her into the underground tunnels beneath the palace. She was screaming your name, Kamen." Kamen's blood ran cold, his breath catching in his throat. "My name? Yes," Nebet said, her voice breaking. "Because she knew you would come. She knew you would find her." "Stop," Kamen said, backing away as if her words were arrows striking his chest. "Stop lying." "You know it's the truth," Nebet said, stepping closer, her shackles clinking like the chains around his heart. "You feel it, don't you? The poison in the palace, the lies wrapping around your neck like a noose." Kamen clenched his fists, his jaw tight, his heart a storm raging beneath his chest. He wanted to keep walking. He wanted to drag her to the place of her execution and leave her to rot in the sand. But now, her words were a poison seeping through his veins, a poison he couldn't shake. And for the first time, he wasn't sure who the real enemy was, the woman in chains before him, or the kingdom he'd sworn to protect. Kamen's mind churned with Nebet's words, her voice echoing like a haunting refrain. "The queen is alive. The queen is in the tunnels. The queen called for you." He gritted his teeth, his grip tightening around the hilt of his sword as they trudged deeper into the valley. The ground beneath their feet was a graveyard of bones, bleached white by the relentless sun. "Why did she call for me?" Kamen demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. Nebet limped beside him, her face pale, her eyes hollow but burning. "Because she trusted you," she said, her voice breaking. "Because you were the only one who could protect her." "Protect her?" Kamen barked a bitter laugh. "You think I could protect the queen from the high priest and the Pharaoh's brother? I am nothing but a soldier. A sword. A dog." "But you're more than that," Nebet said, her gaze unwavering. "You're the only one who can get into the tunnels. You know every inch of the palace. You know every secret passage." Kamen's heart pounded, a dull, relentless beat that echoed through his chest. The tunnels. The ones he had sworn never to enter again. The ones that held memories of blood and betrayal. The ones where his own brother had been murdered in the Pharaoh's name. "And what do you expect me to do?" Kamen said, his jaw clenched. March back into the palace with a condemned woman and demand the queen's release? You don't have to believe me, Nebet said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. But if there's even a chance she's alive, are you willing to let her die? Kamen's jaw worked, his teeth grinding together. The queen had been more than just a ruler. She had been a sister to him once, a friend. The only person who had ever looked at him and seen more than just a blade. You're lying, he said. But the words came out hollow, empty. You're trying to save yourself. If I was lying, Nebet said, stepping closer, her chains rattling. Would I tell you the high priest ordered my death? Would I tell you the Pharaoh's brother paid him in gold to have me killed? Kamen's breath hitched, his heart slamming against his ribs. Gold. The high priest had recently acquired a fortune in gold. The court had whispered about it, but no one dared ask questions. You're saying he was paid to kill you, Kamen said, his voice low, dangerous. Why? Nebet swallowed, her dark eyes locking onto his. Because I know where they're keeping the queen, and because I know the secret that could bring the entire palace crumbling down. The wind howled through the valley, kicking up dust, swirling around them like a sandstorm of ghosts. Kamen stared at her, the woman he had been ordered to escort to death, and in that moment he realized he had a choice: to continue the march to the place of her execution, or to turn around and face the storm that had been brewing beneath the palace all along. Kamen's fists clenched as he paced back and forth, his boots grinding into the sand. Nebet sat slumped against a boulder, her wrists chafed and raw beneath the heavy chains. The sky above them was darkening, the sun dipping below the cliffs, casting long shadows that stretched like claws across the valley floor. You're asking me to betray everything, Kamen said, his voice a ragged whisper. My king, my men, my oath. Your oath? Nebet's laugh was bitter, sharp. You swore to protect the Pharaoh and his bloodline. Well, the queen is the last of that bloodline. Or have you forgotten that? Kamen's jaw tightened. His hands itched to draw his sword, to silence her, to shut her up so he wouldn't have to face the truth staring him in the eyes. And what am I supposed to do? He snapped, his breath coming faster now. Storm the palace alone, fight the high priest and the Pharaoh's brother with a traitor by my side? Nebet lifted her gaze, her dark eyes gleaming in the fading light. You don't have to fight them, she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. You just have to get me inside. Inside? Kamen shook his head, his mind spinning. You're mad. The palace is crawling with guards. You'd be dead before you even reach the gates. Not if they think I'm already dead, Nebet said, her eyes locking onto his. Kamen's brow furrowed. What are you saying? You're a commander, Nebet said, leaning forward, her chains clinking like a death knell. You have access to the vaults, to the old tunnels, to the catacombs where they bury the condemned. Kamen's blood ran cold. The catacombs. The place where bodies were taken to be buried in secret, far away from the eyes of the court. A place where the dead could pass unseen. You want me to smuggle you in? Kamen's voice shook, his mind reeling. Do you even hear yourself? What other choice do you have? Nebet's voice cracked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. If you leave me here, they'll kill me, and then they'll kill the queen. And then they'll come for you. Kamen swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on his chest like a boulder. She was right. If the Pharaoh's brother truly was alive, if the high priest was working with him, then Kamen was already a dead man. And if you're lying, Kamen said, his voice breaking, his gaze hard as stone. If this is all a trick to save yourself? Nebet's eyes didn't waver. Then you can kill me yourself, she said, lifting her wrists, the chains rattling like a serpent's hiss. Right here, right now. Kamen stared at her, his heart a wild, thundering drum. The valley of scorpions stretched around them like a graveyard of broken bones, and somewhere beneath the palace, a queen might still be alive, waiting for someone to save her. The scent of rot and decay filled the catacombs, the air thick and stale, clinging to Kamen's skin like a shroud. He dragged Nebet through the dark passage, his jaw clenched, his sword drawn. The only light came from the flickering torch in his hand, its glow casting eerie shadows that danced along the stone walls. "Keep your head down," Kamen whispered, his voice tight, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. Nebet staggered, her knees weak, her wrists bound but hidden beneath the ragged burial shroud he had wrapped around her. "I can barely breathe," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "Good," Kamen said, his grip tightening on her arm. "The dead don't breathe." The corridor stretched ahead like the throat of a serpent, twisting and turning, leading them deeper into the palace's underbelly. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, as if they were descending into the belly of the underworld itself. "Do you know where they're keeping her?" Kamen asked, his jaw tight, his heart thundering beneath his ribs. "In the chamber of the high priest," Nebet said, her voice barely a breath. "But they won't just be guarding her body, they'll be guarding the secret." "What secret?" Kamen asked, his brow furrowing. Nebet's eyes darted around the shadows, her jaw tight. "The Pharaoh's brother. He's not just alive, he's the one who poisoned the queen. He's the one who ordered the high priest to bury her alive." Kamen's blood ran cold, a chill snaking down his spine. "Bury her alive?" "They needed her blood," Nebet said, her voice trembling. "For the ritual, for the coronation." "The coronation?" Kamen's breath hitched, his mind spinning. "You mean they plan to crown the Pharaoh's brother as the new king?" Nebet said, her eyes burning with fear. "And they need the queen's blood to seal the rite." Kamen's mind raced, his fists clenching. The queen, his queen, was buried alive, her blood being used in a dark, forbidden rite to crown a usurper. "If we don't get to her in time," Nebet said, her voice breaking, "they'll drain her dry. And once the coronation is complete, there will be no stopping them." Kamen swallowed hard, his pulse roaring in his ears. The walls seemed to close in around them, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating cloak. He glanced at Nebet, her eyes wide, her skin pale beneath the shroud. "You know what they'll do to you if they catch you," he said, his jaw tight. "And to me." "I know," Nebet said, her voice steady. "But I also know that the queen is the only one who can prove my innocence, and the only one who can stop the coronation." Kamen took a deep breath, his gaze fixed straight ahead, the torchlight flickering like a dying flame. "Then let's move," he said, his voice cold, hard, unyielding. "Because tonight, the dead will speak." The high priest's chamber loomed before them, its grand stone doors sealed shut, the mark of Anubis etched into the limestone like a curse. Kamen pressed his back against the wall, his breaths shallow, his pulse roaring like a war drum in his ears. Beside him, Nebet crouched low, her wrists still bound, her eyes darting between the door and Kamen's face. "There will be guards inside," Kamen said, his jaw tight, his sword clenched in his fist. "Armed, loyal to the high priest." "I know," Nebet whispered, her voice shaking. "But the queen is in there. We don't have time to wait." Kamen nodded, his gaze darkening. He could hear the low murmur of voices behind the door, the rhythmic chanting of a ritual in progress. The air reeked of burning incense and something darker, something that smelled of blood and death. "Stay behind me," Kamen said, his jaw set. "And whatever you do, don't make a sound." With a swift kick, Kamen burst through the doors, the wood splintering beneath his boot. Inside, the chamber was a nightmare brought to life. The walls were draped in black silk, torches casting eerie shadows over the stone floor. The high priest stood at the center, his back to them, his hands raised high as he chanted in a language older than the sands. At his feet lay the queen, her wrists bound, her skin pale and bloodied, her eyes half-lidded, staring blankly at the ceiling. "No!" Nebet gasped, surging forward, but Kamen grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Wait!" he whispered, his eyes fixed on the high priest. The man's hands glistened with blood, his robe soaked in crimson as he held a ceremonial dagger aloft. "By the blood of the Pharaoh's blood, I seal this rite," the high priest intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "By the will of the brother returned, I declare a new king." "Not today," Kamen snarled, charging forward, his sword a silver arc in the air. The guards moved like shadows, lunging for him, blades flashing in the torchlight. Kamen's sword clashed against theirs, steel ringing against steel as he fought his way through them. Beside him, Nebet grabbed a fallen dagger, her hands shaking as she lunged for the high priest. "You!" the high priest sneered, his eyes glinting like a snake's. "You should have died in the valley, and you should have stayed dead," Nebet spat, swinging the dagger. The blade missed, grazing the high priest's cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. The man's eyes darkened, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "You dare defy the new king?" he bellowed, grabbing Nebet by the throat, lifting her off the ground. "Your blood will seal this rite." "Not if I spill yours first," Kamen roared, charging forward, his sword aimed at the high priest's heart. But before he could strike, a shadow stepped from the corner, a figure cloaked in black, his face hidden behind a golden mask. "Leave her," the figure said, his voice deep, smooth, and terrifyingly familiar. Kamen's blood ran cold, his grip faltering on the sword. The man removed the mask, revealing the face of a ghost. "Brother," the man said, his lips curling into a chilling smile. "Did you really think you could kill me?" Kamen's world spun, his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared into the eyes of the man he had buried years ago. The man whose body he had dragged from the Nile, whose blood had stained his hands. His brother. "Sef!" Kamen's voice was a broken whisper, the word caught between disbelief and horror. Sef smiled, his eyes glinting like a serpent's. "Did you miss me, little brother?" Kamen swallowed, his mouth dry as sand. "You died. I saw you drown. I buried you." "You buried a body," Sef said, stepping forward, his golden robes flowing like a river of blood. "But you didn't bury me." Kamen's fists clenched, his jaw tight. "You betrayed the Pharaoh. You tried to kill him." "I was trying to save him," Sef said, his voice low, dangerous. "From the high priest, from the rot that had already infested the palace." "Liar!" Kamen roared, charging forward, his sword a flash of silver. Sef moved like a shadow, grabbing Nebet by the throat and pulling her against his chest, the ceremonial dagger pressed to her neck. "Careful, brother," Sef said, his eyes cold, dead. "One wrong move and she dies." "Let her go!" Kamen's voice shook, his hands trembling around the hilt of his sword. "She has nothing to do with this." "Oh, but she does," Sef said, his lips brushing against Nebet's ear. "She knows the truth you're too blind to see." "What truth?" Kamen demanded, his chest heaving, his breath ragged. "That the Pharaoh is already dead," Sef said, his smile widening. "That the queen's blood is all that remains of the royal line, and once I drain her dry, the throne will be mine." Kamen's blood turned to ice, his vision blurring. "You can't. Sef, this is madness." "Madness?" Sef laughed, his eyes glittering. "You think it's madness to take back what was stolen from me? To claim what is rightfully mine?" "You have no right," Nebet said, her voice strangled but defiant. "You're a monster." "And you," Sef said, pressing the blade harder against her throat, a drop of blood beating against the steel, "are about to be a sacrifice." Kamen's heart pounded, his pulse a deafening roar. He could feel the weight of his sword, the edge of the blade heavy in his hand. But his feet felt rooted to the ground, his body paralyzed by the memory of the boy he once called brother. "Sef," Kamen said, his voice breaking, "don't do this." Sef's eyes darkened, the smile vanishing. "I already have." With a swift, brutal motion, Sef sliced the blade across Nebet's throat. Blood sprayed across the floor, staining the stone, and Nebet crumpled to the ground, her eyes wide, her lips moving as if to say something that never came. "No!" Kamen roared, lunging forward, his sword flashing through the air. Sef dodged, the blade grazing his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. Sef's eyes gleamed, and for a moment Kamen saw the boy he once knew, the boy who had saved him from drowning, the boy who had sworn to always protect him. But now, that boy was gone. And in his place stood a man with a crown of blood and a heart of ice. Kamen fell to his knees beside Nebet's lifeless body, his hands trembling as they hovered over her still form. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and incense, the torches flickering as though the walls themselves were weeping. Seth stood above him, the dagger still gleaming with Nebet's blood, his eyes as dark as the abyss. "You could have joined me," Seth said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "You could have ruled beside me." Kamen's chest heaved, his breaths coming in sharp, ragged bursts. He couldn't look away from Nebet's eyes, still open, still staring at the ceiling as though searching for the stars she would never see again. "You killed her," Kamen whispered, his voice cracking. "You killed her, Seth." Seth's jaw tightened, the smile fading. She was a threat. She knew too much. Kamen's fingers curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms until blood dripped onto the stone floor. "You said the Pharaoh was dead," Kamen said, his voice hollow, empty. "You said the Queen's blood was the last of the royal line." "I said what needed to be said," Seth said, wiping the blade against his robes, smearing the blood like war paint. "The Pharaoh is alive, but not for long." Kamen's heart lurched, his pulse roaring in his ears. "What have you done?" "What I had to do," Seth said, his eyes hardening. "The Pharaoh was weak. He let the high priest run the kingdom into the ground. He let the people starve while the palace feasted. I offered him a choice. Step down and let me rule, or die a martyr. And he chose death," Kamen said, his voice barely a whisper. Seth's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck twitching. "He chose poorly." Kamen swallowed, his throat dry, his mind spinning. The Queen was alive. Barely. The Pharaoh was dying, and Seth was the serpent coiled around the throne, ready to strike. "You betrayed me," Kamen said, his voice shaking. "You betrayed all of us." "I saved you," Seth snapped, his eyes flashing. "I saved you from a life of being a mindless weapon, a dog on a leash. Don't you see? We could have everything now. Power, wealth, the throne." "I don't want the throne," Kamen said, his hands trembling as he reached for Nebet, closing her eyes with a trembling hand. "I want justice." Seth's eyes narrowed, his jaw set like stone. "Then you're a fool." Kamen rose slowly, his gaze never leaving Seth's. "Maybe I am. But a fool with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind." Seth's lips curled into a sneer, his hand tightening around the hilt of the dagger. "You can't win, brother. I have the high priest. I have the army. And you? You have nothing." "You're wrong," Kamen said, his grip tightening around his sword. "I have the truth." Seth's eyes flashed, and in that instant, he lunged forward, the dagger slashing through the air. Kamen sidestepped, the blade slicing through the empty air as he swung his sword, the steel singing as it clashed against Seth's blade. The sound echoed through the chamber, a haunting, metallic wail. Seth's eyes burned with fury as he struck again, each blow more desperate than the last. "You should have stayed dead," Kamen snarled, his muscles straining as he blocked each strike, the force of Seth's attacks rattling through his bones. "You should have stayed buried." "And you," Seth roared, his teeth bared, "should have drowned that night." The words hit Kamen like a fist to the gut, the memory flooding back. The river, the storm, Seth's hand slipping from his grasp, the darkness swallowing him whole. "I tried to save you," Kamen said, his voice breaking as he drove Seth back, the swords clashing again and again. "I tried to pull you from the water. You let me die," Seth screamed, his face twisted in rage, his blade slashing wildly, his eyes wild with madness. "You let me drown. You betrayed the Pharaoh," Kamen roared, his sword slamming against Seth's, the impact sending shockwaves through his arms. "You betrayed me." Seth stumbled back, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and frantic. Blood dripped from a cut on his cheek, staining the golden robes, the same robes he had worn the day he died. "You can't kill me," Seth said, his voice a rasp, his chest heaving. "I am the rightful king." "You're nothing," Kamen said, his voice cold as the grave. "You're a ghost." With a final furious strike, Kamen drove his sword through Seth's chest, the blade sinking deep, a wet, sickening sound as blood spurted from the wound. Seth's eyes widened, his mouth opening in a silent scream as he staggered back, the blade still embedded in his chest. "Kamen!" Seth whispered, his knees buckling as he fell to the ground, the dagger clattering from his hand. Kamen stood over him, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You were my brother," he said, his voice breaking, his eyes stinging with tears. "And you were my executioner." Seth rasped, blood bubbling from his lips as he gasped for breath. "You were always the stronger one." Kamen dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he cradled Seth's head. The boy who had once been his brother, the boy who had once saved him from drowning. "I'm sorry," Kamen whispered, his tears falling like rain onto Seth's blood-soaked robes. "I'm so sorry." Seth's eyes fluttered, his breaths growing weaker, shallower. "She's still alive," he whispered, his gaze drifting toward the chamber doors. "The Queen! She's still alive!" Kamen's eyes widened, his heart slamming against his ribs as Seth's eyes rolled back, his body going limp in Kamen's arms. The silence was deafening, a void that swallowed everything, a void that stretched on until Kamen was nothing but a man kneeling in a pool of blood, holding the body of his dead brother. And somewhere in the palace, beneath the ground, the Queen was still waiting to be saved.